Hello, everyone. This is another Freedom to Feel conversation, and my guest today is Lynda Hoffman. She is a professional certified coach with the International Coaching Federation. She coaches ambitious business professionals with or without ADHD who want to create meaningful personal and organizational change. So, this is my brief bio, brief intro to you, Lynda. The full bio will be at the end. And I know you're not only limited to executive or business coaching, you do more than that too. So, a question that came to me just recently. I don't know why, but then I have been asking the same question at the beginning of every interview for about 5 years now. But then I think the last 3 days it changed. So I'll ask you. I just asked some of my guests yesterday, so I'll ask you too. How would you introduce yourself without labels? Who are you in your own words?
I love your questions. How do I introduce myself without labels? Language is full of labels. It's how we assign meaning. So that is such a good question. I think the way I would introduce myself without a label is in my way of being. That if I talk about being a coach, the coach is the label, but the way I talk about that is who I am, the way I show up, the way I listen, the way I care.
So there's something about that, right? And I wonder if we can navigate this reality without belief systems. I don't know if I talked to you about this before, but I usually, long ago, I remember asking that question. Is that possible to drop all the labels and kind of be curious and move into this life with what is presented to us?
I believe that it is possible. My understanding of the way the brain works is that our belief systems are ways that we make sense of the world. And so language and labels can be freeing as much as they can be limiting. It's how we use them. When we use them to constrain, to minimize, to make small or fixed in time, those are not helpful. But when a label simply becomes the container in which we then get to explore, what does that actually mean? In this way, we can bounce off our understanding against the walls of that label. Then I think there is a lot that can be found.
I absolutely agree. And I love the way you said that words can be confining, but also freeing. So there are two aspects of everything in a way. It depends the way we interpret them. It depends on our perception. This is basically the topic of our conversation today. Possibility, meaning, agency, holism, and executive coaching. So when did you realize that this was an area that was needed to be addressed within your world of coaching?
It was a slow evolution. I didn't realize until I'd been coaching for a while and coaching other adults with ADHD that there were exceptionally bright and very accomplished people out there who were struggling very much. And they were being dismissed. More and more they were coming to me and telling me these stories about how their doctors would tell them, you don't need to worry about it, you're fine. Meanwhile, their marriages were falling apart. They were having panic attacks. They had no money, even though they were earning six figures in a year. They felt erased, invisible. And even outwardly, if you were to use a label, to use your word, to say these were successful people, they were suffering. So it just struck me that here's a group that's not being heard, and they're in leadership positions. These are people who have the capacity to make other people do very well and be very well. So I thought it was useful.
Yeah, it's very useful. From my perspective, it's actually the essence, the ground of everything. And that has been my understanding for, as long as I can remember, that everything is connected, that the essence of everything is one, and everything affects everything else. So our thoughts, everything within the body and out there as well, the perceived out there. So it surprises me and it fascinates me at the same time that we live in separation. We live from fragmented kind of understanding of ourselves and the world. And of course, it happens, and I can still feel like within myself, like some parts are still kind of it's almost taking baby steps towards holism and wholeness. It's something that it feels to me it's a process of unlearning. Is that yeah? Before I get into the article that you wrote and sent it to me, is that something that you clearly see too, Linda?
I would say yes, because when we're under stress, we tend to go to the binary, which is it's this or it's that. We're in here or we're there. We're successful or we're not. And that closes down all opportunities for us to be learning. And when we're in fear, to sum that up, it gets even worse. I was actually having a few thoughts about that while you were speaking, that there's a bit of a backlash against transgender, non-binary people for that reason, I think. When people are in fear, they don't understand a spectrum. The spectrum can feel very threatening because it doesn't have walls. There's no beginning, middle, and end. How do we understand that? So, yeah, I think we have to, I don't know if it's unlearning so much as relaxing back into the fact that there's another reality that is safe to explore.
Some people call the unknown when you speak of not having beginning or an end, a wall. That's an interesting analogy. So, but it's not really the unknown, right? I think I use the word unlearning because that's what it feels like. That something within me might be the mind, the mind itself, and what it has learned in the past is not really helping to integrate all these parts. Is not helping me to see the world and myself as a whole being. So maybe that's why I use that word. I'm just trying to kind of see if that's the best word to use, unlearning.
Can I offer something on that? It might, when you're talking, I come to my own experience of trying to integrate parts and trying to understand myself in the context I'm in, that sometimes I meet with resistance. The resistance to being in that new way, trusting that new way. I can't speak to exactly what that is, but it's kind of and I wouldn't use the word unlearning for myself. It may apply for you, but I do recognize resistance. I see that in my clients a lot as well, whereas things that are not holistic feel more trustworthy, concrete, visible.
So resistance, that has to do with fear. So we're just those parts in us, they are afraid of meeting something as a whole, as part of the whole. And then what comes to mind immediately as an example is when I see injustice, towards animals and children, then it's this resistance, it just shows up so clearly. It's just there, like trying to push it away, trying to maybe find fault, judge. So how do we learn to undo or to kind of bring that, all this part of us that knows that everything is part of everything's part of God per se, of using this idea of God or life itself. There's nothing that is apart from it, so we can't really push away. But at the same time, I still feel like we can do something about it to bring more awareness into that.
I agree with you completely. And there is something about righteous anger, righteous resistance that I don't think God meant for us to be here and just go, okay, it's all up to God to fix this. That when we see children are being impacted, or animals, the environment, what have you, it's the people who are able to see the big picture who are going to be impacted by that damage more, because you feel and sense and know how interconnected that is. As you know, I work with people who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and all that work includes a lot of focus on executive functioning. Those are the brain-based capacities to do what we know to do. And that ability to connect with the whole at a high level is an executive skill, and not everybody can do it. So you're going to find some people who are able to connect to the indignation around harm to children or to the environment, and others who will not. They won't get it.
Oh, the question that comes to mind. So the executive function in the brain. So what is the other part that we are using to see the fragmented life, or to keep it the way it is? What do you call the other part of it that we are using?
Well, I think when we're fragmented, we're in fear, and we're focusing on probably something outside of ourselves and not actually connecting. And so in that case, the executive functioning issue would be emotional regulation. When our emotions are hijacking our ability, the prefrontal cortex, to make sound, wise decisions that link back to our values, yeah, the amygdala is in charge.
I love the way you say that, actually, speaking about bringing yourself everywhere you go. You said, what you do in one place is what you do everywhere. That stopped me, there's a statement. What you do in one place is what you do everywhere. I would love to hear an example of this. How does it work exactly? How can we grasp this powerful understanding?
I was speaking with a client this morning, actually, who was telling me that, or we were talking about their writing process. They're an academic, published and whatnot, and struggling with the writing process. And as we went more deeply, what was coming up was a tendency to, let me get this, I want to honor this because it was really, really important. It was around a type of perfection, to see that a focus on the goal. The goal is this, ergo the process is messy and I don't like it. It was about performing. So I'd asked, where else in your life do you perform? Everywhere. Everywhere. Not authentic in relationship, not authentic in daily life, navigating family situations, because there's this overriding pattern of wanting to get it right. So when we do it here, chances are likely we're doing it somewhere else as well.
How do some of us actually manage to live in authenticity, from the core of our true power, not trying to be right, not trying to perform, but just coming from a place of truth? This is where that's where I don't want to say I try to come from, but that's where my heart's at. So I'm always following those principles. But what do you suggest, like, for those who are still struggling to be authentic because they have structures around them? If they change within their relationship, they might lose the relationship. If they change within their in a working environment, they might lose their job. So talk to me about that. It seems like a necessary mess.
Well, it doesn't have to make a big mess of everything all at once. I think that's the key, is the first place is to resource yourself, to get really clear on where you're not being authentic. What are you telling yourself that should be different than it actually is? Getting clear on what you want first, you start there. And then there's no point in overwhelming yourself or risking your job or your marriage right away. But what you can do is slowly over time integrate some yeses and nos in the right place that are authentic. And then let's see what happens.
I love that, because it's a very gentle approach to change, transformation, to rebirth in a way.
It is. If we go too quickly, nobody's going to do it. Because you're right. When we change, the world changes. And sometimes we're not ready for how the rest of the world is going to change in response to us.
You speak of this atomistic thinking. Is that how you pronounce it?
Atomistic.
Atomistic, thinking. Explain to me what that means and why it doesn't work. I guess that's a good way of getting into that too, that topic.
Atomistic thinking is what you think it might be, atoms being the smallest particles. When we reduce our thinking into ever smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, sometimes that's useful. Like in a scientific method, great. But when we're talking about understanding ourselves, we cannot be reduced into smaller and smaller pieces. I do believe, this is my personal feeling, that we are greater than the sum of our parts. And when we do try to divide ourselves up into these pieces and understand ourselves as, well, I'm this, I'm that, or I have this part of my life and that part, we lose the whole. We lose the central message, and we get hooked into a way of thinking because that takes us further down that rabbit hole looking for some kind of certainty or truth, and we're looking in the wrong direction. We're just going to get more anxiety because human beings get more anxious the more atomistic we become because we're missing the glue. It's only the glue or the bigger picture that gives us the meaning or the context in which we can understand things.
When we are trying to make, let's say, decisions that are good for the whole. For example, everything I do, it comes from a place that's good for here, for me, body, mind, and then my community, and then the world at large, and then somehow it's good for the earth too. So everything is connected, and it's being affected positively by the work I do. So, and then, but then if I wanted to make, well, lately I have been thinking about moving from this state to another state. And my husband doesn't really like the idea of making that. He thinks it's too radical, to come move from Florida to another state, more specifically Hawaii, which is like all the way in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and all that. So he thinks it's too radical, but he's with me still. So I'm wondering how, because I can see the bigger picture of what I'm trying to do, or the body mind he's trying to do. So is that something that we actually try to convince others and paint that picture so they can see the wholeness of it too? Or we are actually being guided to let go of those that cannot kind of see the vision and support us on that journey?
I don't know what your rationale for moving is. Only you know that. But I'm guessing that there's a set of values that are fueling this choice for you. And your husband might be looking at it not as values, but as logistics. So that the conversation then isn't about the big picture, it's about meeting in the middle, where you're seeing it this way, I'm seeing it that way. How do we bring those two things together? Where do we align? Like, changes the conversation from this or that, but let's put the two of those together. Because the bigger picture, if you're going to go to the bigger picture, the holistic picture, is you two as a couple. If you don't mind me talking about you both, Valeria, but that's the bigger picture here. There's not just you and him, but what the two of you create together.
I think that's what I need, right? It might be, what do you call it? Wisdom? I mean, you come from a beautiful place of wisdom. It seems like it's finding the harmony, the balance between two things. Would you call it that, Lynda? Balance, harmony?
I guess. I'm thinking about that for a minute because I'm in a new relationship, and my new and old. We knew each other 50 years ago. Yes, I'm that old. And we're having to make very big choices. He has made this huge decision to leave where he lives right now in an absolutely beautiful place, like some of the most beautiful land on the planet, to go live here with me because he wants to be with me, which I find beautiful, but I'm aware of what he's letting go of. And so I'm thinking, as you're talking about balance and wisdom and all of that, I think that for me, when I'm looking at a situation that could be rife with all kinds of reactivity and argument about, not by me, but other people in our orbit, about, well, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that, that I hang on to the values. I hang on to what is it I want to create in the rest of my life. And that means how I show up and how I communicate with the people that really matter to me. That I know the choices I make are going to impact everybody around me. They may not agree, but I'm aware of that. And I'm not expecting them to be where I am. So I don't know if it's wisdom or harmony, but one of the essential things I believe in is that we're each responsible for ourselves. That it's really a very fundamental way of being for me.
Yeah, and that is a basic thing, I think, when it comes to almost every ancient spiritual tradition. It's all about how to live in harmony, the respect for one another, this basic understanding that everything is interconnected, is connected, or is one, and then coming from that place is really important. That we create the sense of harmony with everything and everyone. So that's very basic, and I wonder why we still struggle so much. Returning to it. It's very not just basic but natural. And I mentioned earlier this that we have made unnatural ways of living, of being, kind of the norm, and now we have to question that. What is natural? I mean, you come across to me as with your understanding of life since the very first time we talked, very natural and very wise too. So I think they're all connected, right? Lynda, wisdom and those spirituality, harmony. It's really all connected.
It is, and I don't think our culture supports that. And I do believe that's one of the reasons it's more difficult for us to go back to it. What are the structures? Where are the places? Our natural spaces are not there in the way that they used to be. And we don't, spiritual communities are not the same. They are there. And I know people are attending, and there's a great need for that. But I still think that our culture doesn't quite know what to do with it.
That's true. Yes. And hopefully that will change. I don't like the idea of hope, of hoping for something, but
Can I share something with you on that I heard this morning that I thought is quite relevant to what you just said? In Canada, there was a writer recently who wrote about an Indigenous experience from an Indigenous point of view, but it was also written by another writer who was Western, white. And the Western white one has a very objective, hands-off, scientific description of what they saw. The Indigenous person who was interviewing the person they were studying befriended them, got to know them, got inside through a relationship, which Western culture says, no, you have to stay separate in order to be objective and learn something. Whereas the Indigenous view is that you have to be in there with them to experience it, get your feet wet. And I just thought, I had tingles listening to that. I thought that's where you experience the connectedness. There's no separateness.
why we wouldn't get along? Why couldn't people be kind? Like my parents, they were fighting, or my sister. I was always questioning that, and I don't think people around me were. So I don't know. It feels like it is a return to somewhere where maybe we were there once, Lynda. Maybe at some point we embraced this concept of holism, of wholeness, in a very concrete and experiential way. Like you said, just being in relationship, being in harmony with everything, our minds and bodies, and then the people around us, the land, the animals, the food that we ate, everything. But then we're kind of disconnected from all of it. And now we're just trying to return to it. But as you said, the establishment, the structures that we have today, they are not really helping us to make this a reality, make this.
Yeah, most of our culture and our way of being is transactional, not relational. And in hundreds of years ago, it had to be relational, or we wouldn't have survived. But we've lost that for the most part.
That would you say that has something to do with capitalism? This idea that anybody can make it on their own as long as they have enough money.
I'm smiling about that because I'm not an anti-capitalist. I just taken to an extreme. Yes, I will say that.
It goes back to the idea of balance again.
Because even the rugged individualism of the United States and Canada in our early years, they were not entirely on their own. They had to rely on those that were with them, their communities. We speak about that rugged individualism, but now what we're trying to do is be that rugged individual in little silos everywhere. And I think that's what's not helping.
No, yeah, it's doing quite the opposite. Yeah. Gosh, at the end, I love the way you say that, the article that you wrote about holism. Can holism really fix my problem? Question mark. And then you say, if you are asking yourself this question, you're inside the issue. You are in fear-based thinking. You may be looking for guarantees rather than trusting. You as a whole have a limitless potential to grow. That's the idea, again, of separating ourselves in our thinking, in our belief systems. So even by asking the question, if that's needed to fix my problem.
It's natural. I think it's natural for most people when we're facing a big decision or a big change in our lives and we want it so badly. That wanting it so badly makes it suddenly scary. Can this actually happen? Can I actually trust myself? Can I trust my husband to be there in the way I need him to be? That wanting can bring up that fear. And then we ask, can I trust holism in this? Can I trust that there's a way through?
And you're right, fear sets in because it feels like there's a part of us that feels entitled to push away certain things that it's not in alignment with. So how would we do that in a way, Lynda? How can we kind of, for example, not push away, but how can we create a necessary distance between the things that we are in alignment with and the things that we are not?
I guess I'd ask, what do you mean by distance between them?
A very good example is when I see people, some people that are violent. It's like, I would not want to be around them. There's something about violence with words or physical violence that really kind of something tells me to stay away from them physically and not engage with the content of their minds as well. Mm-hmm. So even on TV, I don't watch TV, mainstream TV and all those things. So that's what I mean by distancing myself.
I would agree with you that you do, in that case, do need to distance. There's no reason to expose yourself more and more and more to toxic thinking and toxic doing. We do need to protect ourselves. We need to know enough that we can act when we need to act, but not so much that we're taking it in and it becomes a major stress inside of us. There's no need to live that.
When they are with, especially if they are close to me, like family members. So to me, that would be pushing them away and not accepting them the way they are, as they are. But at the same time, I know I have to create boundaries and stay away from them if I have to. So that's kind of has been a very challenging dance.
I think there's a way of accepting people for who they are and limiting your exposure to them. You can have both at the same time. It doesn't mean you're pushing them away. You're just making a choice about what's healthy for you. It's not about them. This is how they are. You know that's the way it is. And then you get to choose. It can feel to the other person like you've done it in againstness against them, but that's not the case. You're doing it for you.
For some reason, I've been using silence as my so what's my way of keeping the distance. When I hear anything that it's just not in alignment with my heart, and then I just stay quiet. quiet. I don't say anything. I don't respond, react, nothing. Just it is a form of response, obviously. Do you recommend that in a way? Silence, that's not really passive aggression, because I think that would be, and what is the difference really? I know where I come from, so it's not really passive aggression. But how do we know the difference?
Your intention. If the intention is really just to pause and let everything settle, it's fine. If the intention, though, is you're angry and you want to hurt them by withdrawing, that's very different.
So my intention is so that they can hear themselves. I think that's what comes to mind. It came to me immediately, like, okay, your silence represents the space for them to listen to themselves and create this possibility of awareness, of self-awareness, so they can hear their own words and how harsh they are.
Well, it sounds like a nonviolent way of communicating that I'm not part of this. I'm choosing not to be part of this.
So you did mention holism reveals the wisdom that spirit is essential for our well-being. I mean, just that alone kind of I just said, oh, I love Lynda, Lynda for that. So because that's where I feel I think that's what we need the most, to integrate, to kind of bring back the spirit, what we call the soul, that unseen, that invisible part of us that knows how to guide us throughout life for the well-being, not just of humanity, but the earth itself. So talk to me about that. What inspired you to write this way and to bring spirit into your work?
I think, like you, I've always been dabbling in that somewhat. I was raised on the west coast of BC, British Columbia. Rainforest, Indigenous culture was a very big part of my upbringing. And so that connection to nature, I was always outside growing up. And it just struck me that reverence for things outside of ourselves, like nature, for example, things that are so much bigger than we are, appeared very powerful. And as I'm coaching, especially recently, it's often happened where a client is bringing this, and that, and it occurs to me, this is a spiritual crisis. It's not financial. It's not psychological. It's not relational. It's a spiritual crisis. The very question of who they are in the universe, why they're here, what they believe about that. And people aren't often thinking like that. They keep trying to reduce it to, oh, well, if I just had a better job, or, oh, well, if I just had the right partner. But it's so much bigger.
Yes. Wow. I love that. I mean, I love to hear that as almost like a confirmation too, because I talk to so many people that say the same thing, but they are usually already in the field of spirituality or coaching that has to do with spiritual teachings as well, or authors that have written about spirituality. But I love to hear that from you too, that you're seeing this movement towards the return to what we really are, in a way. I have to say that way though, because when I think about what I am, always goes back to something invisible, something that's not tangible. It's not something that I can objectify. I cannot really, it's not an object. It's really not an object. It's not a thing. So it's that which illumines objects that kind of shows me what, the body, the thoughts, but it's what is really behind everything is actually non-human.
No, I think we talked about this the last time we spoke about the soul and when I watched my father die. And we can't see a soul, I don't think, but we know it. And this is, I do believe intuition, energy, soul, it all goes together. There's something powerful there that is more than the body, more than the brain. And I don't know why this is, but I am so connected to some of the people that I love. I know when they're going to call. I know how they are. I have dreams. I had a recurring dream a couple of weeks ago. that I was dying and that I didn't know it. And I didn't realize that what was happening at the same time is a very dear friend in the other part of the world was going through a really bad time, and that his life was at risk. And I did not know that. It wasn't about me, that dream. I know that. So we are connected.
Yes, yeah. So we basically what that is something that's connected to everything. It's one. I think do you call in science they call unified field, isn't it? Isn't that I think you quoted somebody. What's her name?
Carla Hannaford.
Yes, right. In her book. What is the name of the book? Gosh, I have.
Playing in the unified field.
Yes, yeah.
She's
How
a
did you come?
scientist.
Right. So Northern Science. How did you come across her work? Is that was a way to confirm what you already had felt to be true within you?
Well, I found her work through a series of courses on energy work, how to do body work that works with the energy fields. And she was teaching a course on play. And what I was talking to her about was how do we know this works? What's the proof? She's a scientist. I said, give me the language to explain to somebody that this thing that we're going to do together is actually going to help you other than your experience. And the experience is very important at convincing people. But you know people, they want to see what is the scientific evidence this works. And so I thought she must know. And so she was talking in that book about the photography that I can't remember the name for it, where they can take a picture of an oak leaf and see the imprint of an acorn, that the potential for what we will become is already there. We just can't see it. And if people could remember that we are that potential, everything is limitless. Anyway, that's how I found her, and she's an extraordinary human being. And I love that she was both scientific and spiritually driven.
I don't know. Some people do that really well, Lynda, right? I think you are one of the coaches that I know that kind of bring those two sides together, science and spirituality. And I don't know how much of science, because science it's all about facts, as you know. So how can we, maybe we can just explain the effects of it, but you can't really show like what's energy. We can't. I mean, some people claim to see energy, and I think they do. Like psychics and mediums, they do see energy and the aura, the colors, and they can see future, past, and all that. And that has been also. We have evidence for that. But how do we explain to people who are very scientifically driven about that you are infinite?
I don't think they can conceive of it. It's just mind-boggling. So I think there are no words. It has to be experienced. And that's where energy work can be very powerful. Using the body as a way to experience life differently. Because the body changes the brain as much as the brain changes the body. And when I was first introduced to that energy work, I thought, my gosh, I actually feel different. My mood is different. My vitality is different. I feel things inside emotionally I wasn't feeling before. And I did that through movement. And I'm not talking about exercise. I'm talking about acupressure points and other kinds of movements. And that's an incredible mystery that Chinese medicine, for example, Indian medicine, they've all been developing that over thousands of years. So there is a truth there that Western medicine's been cut off from.
Right. That's you're probably speaking of Tai Chi, Qigong. They all explore movement and energy. Basically, your own the body's moving through because it's in connection with the energies within you. So basically, you're moving yourself. It's not really that you are thinking the movements, but it's just something's being moved in a way. That's also the Tao. It's all about the flow of life, that we are being carried here. We are not really in charge of anything, which is really a tough one for most people too.
I think that's a really good point, Valeria, because the more we think we're in charge, the harder it's going to be.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. So you're being moved through with by this energy that it's kind of that wants to do something, and then it's kind of using your body to do it. You being the conduit of that, something like that, like electricity. Actually, I would love to ask you that question. I know you offer your services, coaching, executive coaching, ADHD coaching, mind body integration. Is that the mind body integration coaching that you bring this energetic approach to it?
Yes, I used to do it privately, but I do bring it in to sessions when it's appropriate for calming techniques and how to get back into the body, how to feel what presence feels like. Techniques for doing that, not just cognitively, but knowing in the body what that feels like.
Yeah, that's wisdom, though. That's really the core of wisdom, knowing how to navigate different realities, different minds. So the website is lindahoffman.com. It will be clickable on the podcast notes. I'll also I would love for you to read. At the end, you wrote. You mentioned something. I think there's a quote, or it might be. It reads like a poem
It
almost.
is a poem. It is a poem. I think it got formatted in the wrong way in whatever you have there, but yes, it is a poem. This is a poem by Kaveri Patel. This flurry of snow thoughts inside my mind globe is continuous, no room for sunlight, warmth, peace. I'm stuck inside a pattern I can't control unless I see the woman trapped inside and the one holding the globe. The choice to shake it up again or cradle the scene in her hands till all the cold flakes have settled and quiet serenity abounds.
It's beautiful. It reads almost like a guided meditation too. Yes, if we can just, it's a reminder, isn't it, Linda? I love being reminded through poems, through meeting people, having meaningful conversations, this work, reading about these things. There's something about being reminded of these things, the importance. It's almost like being reminded of what matters. That's what it is. So it's wonderful. Thank you so much again for being you, for your presence, for saying yes to meeting me for this video interview, and for your contribution to well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Valeria. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you. And we'll talk soon. We'll be in touch
Okay,
again, Linda. Bye for now. Take good
bye-bye.
care.